Lovely, thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Menopause Collective with me, your host, Sarah Utley. For those of you joining us for the first time today, the Menopause Collective is a forum for women to share their stories of living alongside menopause and how they overcome barriers and stereotypes to challenge the narrative around menopause. And today, I am delighted to welcome my guest, who is Amantha King. Welcome.
Hello, Sarah. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Happy Friday.
Absolutely.
So Amantha King is the founder of Amantha King Coaching. Her background was in pharmaceutical sales before deciding on a career change into coaching and personal development. And Amantha is a menopause coach, an ambassador through Menopause X, and a trainer on menopause in the workplace, alongside being a mum and a wife and a business owner and a million other hats. A busy lady. So thank you.
That's a wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. And before we spoke a couple of months ago for the first time, I knew very little about histamine and its role in menopause and in particular estrogen dominance. So I was wondering, can you tell us about your journey through menopause and how you discovered you had a histamine intolerance?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I mean, the first thing that I'll say is every woman's journey through menopause is as unique as her fingerprint. So that's a really big concept, isn't it, to get our heads around? You know, I think sometimes we can oversimplify menopause. We think that it's a hormone deficiency and then you need to add in some HRT, and it's not as simple as that. But you know, and that's how my journey started. My journey started quite quickly after I had my daughter. I was about 36. I was approaching my 37th birthday. And I just looked at myself one day in the mirror. I just thought, where have all those spots come from? You know, and I noticed I just felt more irritable, and I just didn't feel myself really. And you know, I just sort of jollied along with it. I just thought, oh, it's tiredness. It's been a new mum. My daughter was about 2.5 then, and I sort of gave myself lots of reasons and justifications for why I was feeling like that. And I think that's very common for women. We just sort of carry on. It's that carry on gene that we've got. And it sort of progressed, and then I just thought, no, actually there's a pattern to this now. You know, I've got a science background. I'm a bit geeky. My husband's a scientist as well. So, you know, we sort of popped up a little Excel spreadsheet, and I just started noticing about my periods that they were getting longer, they were getting shorter, they were heavier, they were lighter. I'd gone from being this very predictable 28 days, could have timed it by my watch type of girl, getting my period, to I never knew when it was coming. The glove box was always stashed with tampons and sanitary pads and goodness knows what. And then I did start to get caught out a few times, you know, having very heavy periods. No, I wouldn't even make it home. And then my periods were so heavy I couldn't leave the house for 6 days. And that's when I took myself to the doctor. And I just said, this can't be normal. It was like I was hemorrhaging. And we call that term flooding now. So literally went backwards and forwards. I had no joy there whatsoever, Sarah, and I've been very public about that. Even this week, I've really put it clearly to my GPs that I'm contacting my MP, because for them to have not a single doctor who's interested in menopause in the practice is disgraceful. To still not be doing anything about it nearly 12 years later is also doubly disgraceful. So they'd sort of signed me off as being worried well. And I found that out because one day a locum GP was there. I'd gone in for my 13th sinus infection, which is how this starts to link in with the histamine. I was constantly getting sinus infections and I couldn't understand it. And what was happening was actually I through my cycle was becoming what we call estrogen dominant. And let me explain a little bit. Progesterone and estrogen are the main hormones that circulate in your body. That's actually incorrect. The most dominant hormone in your body is testosterone. And a lot of women don't know that. So that's the first thing to count here, testosterone. But as we said offline a little bit earlier, is testosterone is actually the basic building block which can make estrogen. So if you've got a lot of testosterone circulating, you generally have a lot more estrogen. But as you start to go through perimenopause, it's actually the hormone that starts to become erratic first. It's actually progesterone, that progestation hormone. And so when that starts to decline, what that means is your estrogen is actually more dominant. And that estrogen shows up in things like your nose, your nasal lining can be quite inflamed at times. You know, your skin is quite puffy. I mean, my skin today is typical estrogen. You can't even see my cheekbones. And that's because I'm retaining water. Now, the thing about estrogen is it's very closely linked to another chemical in our body called histamine. And histamine is vital for life because it actually is one of the first line of defenses when we get a cold, when we get an infection. It's our body's way of getting blood flow there, getting all our immune responses going. But here's the thing, we might not be allergic when we're experiencing higher levels of estrogen, but our body behaves as if we are. And so what happens is your nose just starts lighting up and it swells up. And what it does is it swells up all the way to your ears. And so the tissue becomes very congested. And you might just sound a little bit snuffy, sound like you permanently got a cold. I mean, if I had £1 for every time someone said to me, "Have you got a cold? You sound like really bunged up." And what it actually is your nasal tissue is responding to elevated levels of histamine because you have elevated levels of estrogen. Now, what that also presents with is things like postnasal drip. So when you're sleeping at night, that congestion drains here from your nose to your eustachian tubes, and that then just comes back down here. And of course, if you've got your head tilted back, it'll either go into your stomach or it will go into your chest cavity. So not only was I presenting with sinus infections, I was constantly getting chest infections. But no one was joining the dots for me. No one at all. I mean, it's outrageous that I would have had 13 prescriptions for antibiotics in 1 year alone, and no one was paying attention.
I think that's symptomatic of a broader issue with how GP service is delivered. Probably quite an unpopular thing to say, but I agree. You never get to see the same doctor, and therefore you are left to join the dots yourself. And 13 prescriptions later, one would have assumed somebody may have thought, something's not quite right there.
No, but because I'm interested, Sarah, and I'm the curator of my own health, I'm the architect of my life. And I would say every woman, you are the architect of your life. I took myself, and I was so embarrassed about this, and I don't know why I felt embarrassed, but I did feel a lot of stigma. I realised the only way I was going to get to the bottom of this was to get some blood tests done. My GP surgery told me to go on a holiday. They told me I was a bit stressed out. They told me I was worried well, which I had removed off of my notes because that is not a medical diagnosis. I'm pretty sure someone probably would have tried to prescribe me antidepressants. But instead, what I did was I took myself to the local sexual health clinic in Barnstaple in North Devon, where I live. And I sat there, goodness knows what people were thinking, you know, sat with every type of person you can imagine. And we're all there and people are probably judging us. And I actually saw a lady, he said to me, "You've got quite a lot of yeast vaginally. Are you having a lot of infections with thrush?" So that was the other thing I was having. I was having a lot of bouts of candida overgrowth. And that's again because of estrogen, you know, dominance, and just being susceptible. And it was that lady that said, "I think we need to do some bloods here to see what's going on." Now, I'd done my homework. I knew that I needed to have my FSH, which is your follicle stimulating hormone levels, done, and get my estrogen progesterone levels. And it came back, and she said, she rang me. I was on holiday. I remember it so well. I was in Italy. And she rang me and she said, "Can you make an appointment as a matter of urgency?" She said, "You have no estrogen at all." She said, "But worse than that, you've got no progesterone." So I was dominant, but with basically nothing in the tank.
Wow.
So because I had no progesterone, but like a smattering of estrogen, she said, "Your bones are really at risk. You're at risk of being developing osteoporosis." She said, "Your cardiovascular health and your brain health." She said, please, please come in and see me as soon as you get back. And that's what it took. It took for that to happen, for me to realize I wasn't going mad, despite everyone perhaps trying to lead me down that path, that I was neurotic and worried well. And that has always stayed with me, because I feel there's an injustice there.
I agree with you. And when I first started going through perimenopause, I swear my husband thought I was just losing the plot, because one day I'd wake up and say, I've got a headache. The next day it would be, oh, I've got another period, or I can't breathe properly, or my joints ache. Yeah, worried well. That's a lovely phrase. He was probably thinking exactly the same. She's getting neurotic. Everything's wrong. She can't stop complaining about this, that, and the other. But it's just this myriad of random things that started happening to me. And I didn't get any joy at the doctors either. I was told I was far too young. I was 32, which is young, but not uncommon. There are loads of women that go through perimenopause at an early age. And the stigma around menopause just happening to people in their 50s is something I'm really passionate about knocking down, because I'm a living proof that you can have menopause at an early age. So yeah, completely agree. So you literally had no estrogen, no progesterone. You went on HRT at that point?
No,
No.
I didn't.
Okay.
No, I didn't, because they said you were too young.
Oh.
So even though I met this, aspirational doctor, she said, why don't we try you? Oh, that was it. They wanted me to have the Mirena coil. Now, the thing is, anyone listening to this, women know their bodies. Please don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You know your body. And I knew that I was progesterone sensitive. I knew I didn't feel great, often in the second part of my cycle. My boobs would feel massive and heavy, and I'd just feel like, I just feel wretched, and I couldn't wait for this period to come. And then it would be like, another 2 weeks. Now, they do call that PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and it's a recognized condition that's related to the fluctuation and change of those two hormones. So I said, no, I definitely don't want a Mirena coil. Now, the great thing is, I used to sell HRT, hormone replacement therapy. So, they picked the wrong person, really. Science background, sold HRT in the 2000s when it was the first time around, and has a complex perimenopause. So I knew that wasn't going to work for me. And I'm so glad I resisted that, because that is a long-term intervention. You don't just put it in for a day and take it out. It's in for 5 or more years. So I said no. So they put me on something called Clara, which is it's a sequential contraceptive that's meant to mimic that fluctuation in hormones. And for a while, I was okay. And then I wasn't. And that's not the Disney version of menopause, by the way. The Disney version of menopause is that it's all going to be okay. You take HRT and it'll all be fine. Or you take some contraceptives, it's all fine. It's rubbish. It's not. It takes on average 12 to 14 months for someone to stabilize on any HRT or any intervention. And so I had that honeymoon period, and then it started to fall apart again. Why? Because my body was going, we don't like this stuff that you're putting inside of you. So my body was rebelling. And there are, I think, a lot of women that are very hormonally sensitive. Maybe they didn't realize it in their 20s and 30s or even early 40s, but our bodies become very sensitive. And if you do have histamine intolerance, which I do, you're doubly sensitive. So your friends might be able to get away with a maintenance dose. If you're histamine sensitive, you cannot do the same. So for me, I then had to then go back to the drawing board. It was like, what next? And it happened to be that my husband was listening, who, like your husband, incredibly supportive. My husband was listening to the radio one day, and he heard on, I think it was Radio 4, that there was going to be something called the Women's Hour about menopause. And that was a game changer for me, because that's when I got myself in front of a menopause specialist.
And when you got yourself in front of that menopause specialist, how did you feel?
really emotional. And I just wanted to tell my story, even though there wasn't a lot of time. And I think this is something that's really important. Whenever I work with women, either executives or people who come to me directly for menopause coaching, I become that space for them to tell their story. Because there's a lot of emotional trauma around not having a diagnosis and having to suffer, because it is really suffering. I consider myself to be a very strong woman, and I've suffered. And that's not to say you have to be strong. You don't actually. Actually, I think that one of the biggest things that I've learned in being menopausal is being vulnerable, which is why I'm here talking about it today very openly. And that the reality is, I just had to say how I was feeling. But again, I'm not sure the person in front of me, I think she was really empathetic, but I think those people are also overwhelmed and maybe not knowing everything about how to treat people. And even that experience wasn't overtly positive for me, because I was described as a difficult case. You know, and that's what we're up against. We're up against the lack of knowledge in the medical profession. We're up against the fact that menopause, as my doctor told me this week, isn't a priority. Well, excuse me, if you're treating anyone with cardiovascular disease, if you're treating anyone with osteoporosis, if you're treating with anyone with depression, you need and have a responsibility to exclude menopause from that diagnosis. Because as we know, too many women are just given antidepressants because the signs and symptoms are very similar to perimenopause. So yeah, I didn't come away feeling like, yay. Oh, and by the way, I've spent in excess of £10,000 getting myself right. I'm pretty sure most women in this country would struggle, as I've struggled financially, to find that money to better myself, to feel okay.
Well, like you, I'm in a privileged position to be able to afford private healthcare, and my experience at the doctor propelled me towards a specialist in gynecology. Whether she is the right person for my ongoing menopause journey, but just the empowerment that gave me to go and have a conversation and, like you, tell my story. And it felt cathartic in many ways, because I thought I was going a little bit mad. And for me, perimenopause has triggered social anxiety. I've gone from being a very vivacious, outgoing, confident person to having panic attacks and not really wanting to put myself in a position where I have to talk in public or meet new people. So even the act of doing this is something that I celebrate, because a year ago, 2 years ago, maybe, I would never do this at all. And so I've come a long way mentally through coaching and through talking to people and cognitive behavioral therapy to understand some of the things that are going on with me. But I did sit in front of this specialist, tell my story, and there was relief in knowing, well, you know, you're not going mad. This could be the menopause transition. And I don't know whether I needed the label, but it did make me feel slightly better that I'm not going mad, that I'm not losing my mind, and that this is normal for some people.
Absolutely. And I think that's the most reassuring feedback I get. I mean, firstly, it's brilliant that you're doing this. It's really brilliant. And it will help women you'll never meet, Sarah. That's the whole point of this. We'll never know all the people we've reached, and yet you speaking about your experience, your truths, will touch somebody somewhere that makes them think, okay, right, yeah, I've heard something there, I'm going to do something about it. And that's what we need to do, because I do think menopause is a sisterhood. You know, I'm a menopauser and I'm proud of being one, but there's no pause in what I'm doing. And the reality is, I still am fighting to find the right things for me, and that takes a lot of research, takes a lot of my time. I'm happy to do it, you know, because I am that science geek, I am that person, and I think that benefits people, because otherwise what we do is we go along and we're almost being experimented on, you know, and I'm really not happy with that. You know, this is a time for women to be helped, to be assisted, to be sorted out. This isn't time for people to be experimenting with our health. So I think that the fact that there is so much noise about menopause is great. I want to see some action. I want to see some action in businesses. I want to see some action within the medical profession. And I want that coming together, which is actually, we need women in the upper ranks of business. We need women to be coming out of their houses and not hiding away, because they have so much to offer. Whether they're working or whether they're not working, we need to hear and see the voices of women. So like I say, it is brilliant that you're doing this, that, you know, and do more of it, because it's fantastic.
Likewise, indeed. You also talk really powerfully about the role that men play in the menopause conversation. I know your husband's been great support. Indeed, mine has too. But I imagine a lot of women may not have that. And you interviewed Lee Chambers recently, and I listened to that, and I was blown away by his humility, and just he's just such a pleasurable man to listen to. And the male privilege that he spoke about was really interesting. I was wondering if you could just give an overview of what your conversation was about and what male privilege means.
Yeah, it was fascinating. So, you know, Lee is one of those people that really caught my attention, because he really is a diversity, equality, inclusion expert. And, you know, check him out if you haven't heard of him already. But Lee was obviously, to me, the only man on the circuit talking about menopause. And I just thought, right, okay, so I've got to interview him. And the basis of our discussion was this: men and women really have no understanding of each other's health life course. So let me explain what I mean by that. The Department of Health have come up with the women's health strategy, and they talk about the life course, about women from literally birth to death and everything that we will experience. And so that has not been something that's been paid attention to up until now. But I think menopause has enabled that to become more focused, in that actually, you know, we have our hormones from literally the moment we're born, puberty, our fertility years, and then progressing into perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause and beyond. And so we have those hormones with us every day in a way that men don't. You know, when I watch my teenage daughter now get her school bag ready and she's got all her sanitary products, you know, we already have that fear ingrained in us of, well, I don't want to get caught out. You know, even if we're, you know, unconsciously not aware, that is what we're doing. We're constantly preparing, managing, planning for our hormones in a way that men just don't, you know. And Lee was brilliant. He said, the only thing I want to do is check my balls, you know, to make sure, you know, that his prostate's okay, and all of those sorts of things. So, you know, self-care is very much more minimal for men, whereas for women, we're told to check our breasts, we're told to take the contraceptive pill so we don't get pregnant. We're allowed or encouraged to get pregnant, and then straight away we're told, well, the first conversation most women have with their doctor after having a baby is, what contraception do you want to go back on? So we're contraceptualized as a group in a way that men aren't. So men, why on earth would they have any comprehension what it's like to be a woman experiencing perimenopause, menopause, or any other menstruating health situation? They just wouldn't. And so for that reason, there's this canyon of distance between us, in that they don't understand, and therefore what they don't understand, they become fearful of, you know.
And also what I heard from him was our hormones are always like this. Men, static hormones throughout their entire lives. And therefore they, will never understand that cyclical fluctuation and the impact that that has on how you think, feel, and behave. And that why, that male privilege is about that as well. Taking for granted, as you said, I've only really got to check my testicles. I haven't got to check anything else, but I'm static all the time. It's a nice place to be. I have envy there.
Absolutely. And that's that male privilege he talks about unpacking. He says, come on, guys, we need to talk about it. We there's not a single business or organization in this country that doesn't have a woman in it. So if you just reflect on that, menopause is everywhere then. And when we look at organizations like the NHS, 77% of women make up the NHS. People, the frontline workers that have got us through a pandemic, and the bulk of that percentage are women in their 40s to 60s. And so the reality is we are surrounded by women enduring menopause. And I saw a TED talk recently that describes the pain that women experience during menstrual cycles is equivalent to that of a heart attack. So we are suffering on, we struggle on. Women are conditioned to cope.
Yep.
Which is why we give ourselves such a hard time when we feel we're not coping. And there's power in that. So to have someone like Lee come into that space and proactively, he's not a one hit wonder. He talks about menopause and the impact on diversity, equality, and inclusion most weeks, I would imagine.
So what can we do to encourage more voices like that? I know you reached out to men on LinkedIn, and when we last spoke, you had about 10 men who were interested in engaging with you. How far have you taken that in terms of a journey?
Well, it's been a very interesting social experiment because I have 11 men out of, I had I think a reach of about 6,000 views of that post, and 11 people have come forward, and from all different walks of life. I think we have some way to go, because the reality is we need to speak in a different type of language to men about menopause than the language we speak to women about, for the reason that you just said, which is that they have a very static experience with their hormones, whereas we have a very cyclical, transitional, erratic relationship with our hormones. And so we need to maybe meet in the middle, and part of that meeting in the middle is to think, well, how do we need to talk to men? I've got an amazing colleague who's actually written a book, and it's here. It's called Men, Let's Talk Menopause, and it's by a brilliant author called Ruth Devlin, and she's a former nurse, and she wrote it really for her husband to understand. And my husband read it, and I can honestly tell you, he was sat in the lounge laughing and really just said, I get it now, because it's written in a format that appeals to men. And that's not taking anything away from guys, but this is the format. It's short, bite-sized. It's not too lengthy, certainly not too wordy. It's got humour in it. And it is jam-packed full of advice and things that they can do to help. And that's probably the biggest thing here. Men will be much more likely to get involved if they feel they can help in some way. Rather than having menopause literally done to them. If they feel they can do something with it and help, then that's brilliant. And in my experience, I coach a number of senior executives. We always have a conversation about what life's like at home. So guess what pops up a lot of the time? Menopause, perimenopause, daughters going through endometriosis, all of those sorts of things. Men are aware of these things, but because of their conditioning in the work environment, they don't know how to talk about it. They don't even think they have a right or permission to talk about it, because anyone who dares to talk about it will be lambasted because they got some terminology wrong, or they didn't say it quite rightly, or whatever, they're misunderstood. So I think we've got to boost the confidence of men. And I think someone like Lee is great. I was delighted to see Sadiq Khan this week on International Women's Day. Actually, I think he was with Lorraine on the television talking about menopause, and as Mayor of London, his strategy for dealing with that. Now, it's a starting point. Okay. Yes, there were some stereotypical slides used of a woman in her 50s. So we've got to move beyond that. We know that demographically, some types of women from different minorities will experience menopause earlier. So Asian and Black women will experience menopause much, much earlier than their white counterparts. So I think we need to gen up a little bit, come up to speed with that. But I am grateful to him for being a man who spoke so confidently about menopause. He spoke like I'm speaking about menopause. It was so refreshing, and I urge people to watch that. And if you're a man, as Lee says, get off the fence and do your bit, because we need you.
I think men may find it challenging to come forward because of this fear of being perceived by their wives or partners to be, moaning about them or letting them down. And your experience in the home of menopause can be quite, it's a private experience in many ways, and it can be quite destructive on your relationship and how you feel about yourself as well as the person you're with. And I can imagine the challenge that men feel around that, being vulnerable, opening up about what's happening within their relationships. It's different. Women, I think, are more comfortable talking about things that are quite personal, talking about things that are happening with their bodies, things that are happening in their life. I'm just intrigued about what we can do to change the narrative so that, as you say, more men can come forward confidently and talk, because I think that's what's really needed. Otherwise, we run the risk of menopause just being run for women, by women, for women in the workplace, and we need more male allies. Trying to crack that nut is the mission.
Well, I mean, that's so true, everything you said, and I agree with all of that. And one thing, I'm a mental health first aider as well. And so when I was looking at this group of men, one of the things that struck me is it was staring me in the face. It was so obvious. When we look statistically at men and mental health, men don't talk anywhere near enough about their own mental health, whereas women do. Women do talk a lot and they seek out help. So here's the thing, why would men start talking about menopause? They don't even talk about their own mental health. So the reality is, what I've discovered is men do talk about menopause, but they talk about it to other men. And I'll tell you where I get that evidence from. My husband, obviously people see me every week talking about menopause. By association, they know who my husband is. And people have been seeking my husband out at work, privately, wonderful, in corridors, asking his advice. And he recommends books, he recommends videos, he actually sits and talks with people. And these are very candid conversations. And you're absolutely right, Sarah. There is a fear of being, not unfaithful, but being disloyal to a partner if you're talking about it. I've often asked my husband to come on and talk about it. And I'm getting there with him. Maybe, who knows, one day he'll come on a video with me. But the reality is, he said it's very, very personal for you. And you're right, our partners see the best and worst of us. Would I want a video of me in some menopausal rage? No, probably not. Why? Because of the fear and stigma that I think would come my way, and the judgment for something that is out of my control.
That so resonates with me. And I think back to my peak of social anxiety, which showed up at work quite a lot in what I did, or I felt it did. Maybe other people didn't perceive that. And, being that vulnerable to show that and say that has taken me a long time to get there. But I remember when I was at work, And some woman said to me, is there something wrong with you? It's kind of like the worst thing you can ever say to somebody. Is there something wrong with you? And that just compounded everything I felt in that moment about, you know, everybody can see this. Everybody will know that I, you know, well, maybe they'll judge me, and maybe they'll judge my ability and my sense of, you know, my worth. And that really impacted how I felt about myself. And just that on top of the experience of menopause is enough to make you want to go and just hide. So yeah, I've lost my train of thought somewhat there, sorry.
Well, no, and I think that's so powerful, because when we think of where it can lead for some people, let's not shy away from the statistics. The average age for a woman to take her life is 51.
Yep.
The average age for a woman to experience menopause is 51.
Yep.
Divorce is highest in the menopausal group, and instigated by women, because it damages our relationships, because we actually just feel so wretched, and we feel that people would be better off without us. And I definitely felt that. I can remember going for lots of very long walks thinking, I think everyone would be better off without me, because I just seemed to cause so much upset and trouble. There was never an intention to harm myself, but I can honestly tell you the pain of the guilt, and seeing on people's faces just how much upset my mood was causing is horrible. It's really horrible. And it's what drives me to continue to do this, because actually it is not in your control. So we need to lose the thoughts that people think, oh, it's her menopause and she's been difficult. She has no control over it either, is what I'd just like to put on the table. And you know, I think we're a long way off from guys going into the pub and grabbing a pint and going, how's your wife's menopause? I don't think it would take too much to get there, though, because actually most men, if they just even open up about their wives, will also start to open up about their own struggles. Because guess what, boys, the andropause is a thing, and that's the male version of the you know, menopause, the andropause. And so they will ultimately have fluctuations in their testosterone levels. But I think I want a call to action for men to know you are a massive part, supporting partners as well, not just men. You are a massive part of the solution. Please step forward. We need your help, because together we're stronger. If you can join us and meet us with some knowledge, some enthusiasm, some real desire to help, because there are amazing people out there. And you know, life's for living. A woman will spend a third of her life post-menopausally. I've certainly got a lot that I still want to do. I'm so blessed to have a lovely, gorgeous husband, been together 30 years this year, been through the biggest ups and downs a life could throw at you. And you know what? I think the best is yet to come. And I think that's the thing. So guys, there's a payoff. There's something in it for you. You're not going to put all this effort in and not get something out of it. You know, what you put in will be reflected back to you in the eyes of the person that you're helping. Now, that might be someone in your relationship, but it could be someone in your team. It could be someone in your department. It could be someone in your organization. Do you know what? You be the Lee Chambers type character in your place of work, because it's not difficult.
And this is the kind of narrative change that I'm really passionate about, because the media portrays menopause as there's something wrong with you. And it's very negative. And we talk a lot about the symptoms and the problems. And we do that because we want to reach women who are feeling the same way, but don't know why that is, and to take comfort that there's a lot of people experiencing what you're experiencing. But I would love to turn it on its head. As you said, the next 30 years of your life awaits you. This is the time when you can make some radical choices about your purpose and your passion, and how you want to live your life. and the people you want to live it with. And so it's the opportunity to just shrug off some of that societal, I don't know, preconceptions of what you should be, and go, you know what, I don't care. This is the way I'm going to be going forward. I think it's really, really embracing, empowering, and positive. So that's what motivates me on my menopause journey, and also in the coaching that I do with women experiencing menopause.
Absolutely. And if I could just add one thing, menopause is like the biggest floodlight. Okay. And what I would say is, if you have stuff popping up in your life, it was always there. If it's just a coincidence, it's popping up during perimenopause and menopause. And I always say to people, you know, this isn't happening to you because of menopause. Menopause is shining a light on what was always there. So when people feel lost in their career, when they feel like their confidence is waning, when they feel like there's that imposter syndrome, actually those things probably were always there to some degree. But because of our declining hormones, we do become more anxious. We know that progesterone is an anti-anxiety hormone. That's why when we get it back, we sleep better, we feel more capable, you know. So the reality is, those anxieties are always in the background, I believe. And I believe that perimenopause and menopause just spotlights that, or floodlights it even. And that's why that then becomes our narrative as women, that I can't do it, I've given up, I've lost my confidence, I'm anxious. We start actually almost metaphorically pinning these labels on ourselves, and then we identify with them, and then we think that's our lot. Whereas what I would like to challenge is, I think it's mind and body. And I think that's why I feel so lucky. I've got that clinical background that I can talk about what's happening to you, but I can also help you with how that's manifesting in your mind and the things you're telling yourself. Because, you know, we need to be careful of what we think on. You know, what you consume inside your head invariably is what you become. So if we can challenge those narratives, and that's why mental health and menopause are so important in the workplace, because actually menopause is a mental health conversation, because it affects women so dramatically. So I agree with you. And we need more people like us, Sarah, that can have those conversations, so that women feel like, yeah, okay, right, okay, so the menopause is one thing, I'm getting that sorted out, and actually I've got this other stuff that was probably already there, and I want to get that sorted too. I speak to at least 20 women a week that fit that description that I just gave you.
Yeah. I don't speak with that many women as you, but I speak with a lot. And you are what you focus your attention on. And that's been so powerful to me. And so changing your own mental narrative has been fabulous. And I have to say, my coach training has enabled me to change my narrative and to understand about, you know, how I think and feel and behave more. So it's very cathartic for me to have had that coach training and apply it to other people as well. But yeah, we're coming to the end of our conversation, but I know you're an ambassador of Menopause X. What is Menopause X and what do you do?
Okay, so I'm actually volunteering with them. I saw a call to action, and this is one of the things I want people to notice. You know, I'm a menopauser. I'm busier than ever. I'm more fulfilled than ever. I'm more sure of who I am, and I'm putting myself out there. This is your narrative, if you're listening to this, okay? And so I saw a call to action come up. I was lucky enough to interview the producer for Kate Muir, actually is her name, for the Channel 4 documentary with Davina McCall. And I saw this advert from Women in Data, actually, calling for volunteers. And my role in that is to do with the social media. But Menopause X is about actually getting the data insights that actually will demonstrate to businesses what is the cost of menopause in their workplace. And actually, it's going to get the data to challenge some of the narratives that we're seeing in terms of how people are treated, What are the financial impacts? What are the data analytics that show the fallout of menopause? Because we don't have that data right now. So we're making lots of adjustments and making lots of recommendations, but without the backing of the data to substantiate it. You know, we know that there are differences in terms of financial impacts, depending on where you live in the country, the availability of menopause specialist centres. So this is really the start. It's about actually knowing your numbers, and Menopause X is committed to actually providing the means to do that. So I'm a small part of a massive machine. We're all volunteers. So if anyone is interested in joining, get in touch with me and I'll let you know how to do that. But yeah, Menopause X, it's about really putting menopause on the map. And the hope is that some of the data may be used in the second documentary, which is coming out in May with Davina McCall. And that's one to watch, because that's looking at menopause in the workplace, looking at some of the things that people are asked to do, like signing non-disclosure agreements, about how women are sidelined and actually often removed from positions. So we've got some work to do. And so being part of that for me was about crystallizing what I already know and being able to be part of something that makes a difference to women going forward.
Fabulous. I'd love to get involved, so I will find out more about that.
Definitely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amantha. I really hold you up as the person that knows so much about menopause. You're so inspiring, and you've certainly made a big difference to me and my journey through menopause. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you.